The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM.
Welcome to the Center for Educational Media at MTSU. I'm Dr. Laura Clark, the director of the center. We are a center in the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University. And this is the SPED Collaborative Summer Academy. We are happy to present sessions for special education teachers in Tennessee, and they are on topics requested by teachers and presented by teachers. So today we're particularly happy to have a session by Dr. Lori Chu and Ms. Taylor Draper. And the title of this session is Partnering with General Education, Moving Beyond Collaboration. And so I'll let Dr. Chu and Ms. Draper finish their introductions.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. We are so excited to be here with you guys today. And we thank you all for coming out to support us. One of the things that I would like to reiterate is how this collaborative works together to present real problems, like what are we really and truly dealing with in the classrooms, and so that our PDs are effective and we're not just talking about things that are irrelevant, like what is happening in the real world, what do we need help with right now. So we have made a fantastic effort collaboratively partnering with MTSU, with different districts as well, to get insight. So I do want to, I will include my information at the end. If you have things that you would like to have highlighted or that you would like to see presented in the future, please do feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you would like to see. But as Dr. Clark said, my name is Lori Chu. This is my 4th year with Murfreesboro City Schools. I'm a proud True Blue alumni, and I have worked with Ms. Taylor Draper for the last 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years.
Okay. And but the reason I went to Ms. Draper specifically to be a part of this is because we had the most beautiful collaboration that I think I've probably experienced in my 12-year career. It worked out beautifully, and I wanted to be able to show what collaboration should look like, okay? And so with me teaching special education and Ms. Draper teaching 4th grade, I feel like it was the perfect example to bring to you guys. Ms. Draper, would you like to say anything about your classroom and your experience?
Yeah, so first I'm excited to be here. I will say when she asked me to do it, I said yes very quickly. And then they mentioned microphones and I was like, I don't know, I can talk in front of students, but you put a microphone on me and I'm a little nervous. But in my classroom, I noticed this year that it was a huge difference in really truly collaborating with Dr. Chu and diving in and working together. I think a lot of times we stick to our wheelhouse and what we know, and so it becomes very departmentalized even within a building. And when you're working for students, we know that we have to serve them with what they need, and they need all the things. So I think it was a beautiful demonstration of being able to collaborate together and work together, and we definitely could see the difference with our kids.
Totally agree. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start. One of the things that I wanted to start with is just the reminder of what the goal of special education is to begin with. What we want to do as special education teachers, of course, is provide support to all of our teachers. We want to meet the student needs. We forget about that first one sometimes, though, don't we? Because we're always worried about the kids. But we also need to provide that support to teachers. And one of the things that teachers have questions about every year, how do I grade these kids? They can't do what we're doing. How do I grade them? And there's a fine balance between the grades that they get and continuing to hold them accountable. Are they really earning that grade? And so that is our whole goal. It sounds simple on the outside, but then you get to thinking about where that gap is. So I'm a very visual person. And so my visual thought on this slide was, imagine special education at the top on one side and general education at the top on the other side. Special education, we're worried about teaching skills. General education is worried about teaching standards, right? There's a huge difference in teaching phonics and teaching summarizing. See, just right there. Like, I can blurt out all the things I teach all day long, but the things that she teaches, I'm like, yeah, what is it again? What do you teach, you know? And so when it becomes a problem in that teachers don't understand what kind of grades to give, and you start coming at them with, oh, you need to do this accommodation and that modification. And oh, by the way, you've got 5 kids that you need to do that for in addition to your 20 others, right? And so I got to thinking about this. Really and truly, the meeting that we had planning for this changed me in a very positive way. And you're about to see the one that is responsible for that change on video. But I want to kind of tell a story and relate it back to yet another visual, and that's what we're great for, right? And I will provide a handout at the end as well, just as a reminder of all 4 of these areas. When we're talking about restorative practices, I mean, you know, you think about all of the words that you can use and categorizing that, the whole concept of restorative practices, you could categorize it into 4 different areas, right? So when you think about the way you relate to other people, both your students, your teachers, even your family members, you can do things to someone, right? You can do things with someone. You can do nothing, or you can do things for someone, right? So thinking about all 4 of those categories, I want you to just hear my story and be thinking while you're hearing the story which part of that I was touching, okay? I had a teacher last year that had a lot of SPED kids. He had I almost think he had 7 SPED students in his classroom in addition to his others. At the beginning of the year, we met, we reviewed his IEPs at a glance. I said, here you go, these are your students, this is what you need to look out for. Call me if you need me. Like, really, I am here to support you, just let me know what you need. And if anybody comes to me and asks me, I think I'll always say, yeah, sure, let's tackle that problem together. Let's do that right now, right? I send everybody out on their way, and 2 weeks in, I'm looking around the classroom one day, and I was like, this is your classroom, but you do realize that you've got all of my students sitting in a circle in between everybody else. And the answer was yes, it's easier for me to get to them. I was like, okay. Again, this is your classroom. I mean, you know, just a thought, you know, we definitely don't want to single our students out. And that was taken and received, I feel like, and I was thanked. I go away. A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call from a parent. And they're like, this teacher has got my kid seated in between everybody else. He says that all of the other students in the middle are like him. And I said, okay, let me go talk to the teacher and, I'll follow back up with you. So I go back to this teacher and I said, listen, I've had a parent call and she really doesn't want her child singled out. We really need to move his chair. If you don't care to move him. Yes, okay, I'll do that. So a couple weeks goes by and I go back and I said, hey, don't forget, we got to move this kid. It's taken, and a couple weeks later, I go back, and at that point, I was thinking, okay, I'm about to get another phone call. So I just walked into his room one day and I went up to the student's desk and I said, where do you want to move this desk? Y'all, he stopped teaching, and we rearranged that classroom right then and there. Now think about where I was at that point. Was I doing something to him? Was I doing something with him? Was I doing nothing about it? Or was I doing something for him? I think you could argue a couple of different points there, really. But it was not an ideal situation. It was very bold of me to even, I really don't even know why I did that. And then, on top of that, I had to go to my administration and say, you know what I just did? Thank goodness she was very kind to me, and she said, you're just trying to advocate for the teacher or for the student. And she said, but I know what the issue is. This teacher is struggling with organization. I was like, okay, I kind of let that go in one ear, out the other ear, until, again, thinking about just a reminder, where does my story fit in there? And what is the ideal situation? Do you want to do things to somebody? Do you want to do things with somebody? Do you want to do nothing about it? Or do you want to do something for somebody? What would you say would be the ideal situation? With? Do you think you grow more when you do things with someone? Do both parties grow? And it doesn't feel as invasive, right? It doesn't feel like you're being told what to do, right? You have that buy-in, you have that ownership when we do things together. This is another thing I did, just trying to get across, I'm not seeing this in your classroom, but here's a visual example. Again, I'm a visual person, and I explained what my thought process was here. I said, my daughter's dog likes to jump up onto that little stool. Well, that's not safe for her, right? And I knew the way she was getting up there it was a quick jump from the couch that was over here to the stools. And so I moved the stools away. And so I explained, this is an accommodation. I'm moving the stools away from her, right? I'm still setting that same expectation for her, but I'm just moving the stools away so that she can't access those. And she failed. She still, instead of jumping from the couch to the stool, then she was jumping straight from the floor to the stool. And I was like, okay, that didn't work either, right? So then I modified and I laid the stool down. So even if she does jump up there, she's not going to get hurt because she couldn't meet my expectation. And so I thought, okay, well, that will fix it. That will get me accommodations and modifications and what I need in order to remain legal, right? Because it is a legal issue. They have to do accommodations and modifications, right? So I thought, okay, I give him a visual, and now we're going to get accommodations and modifications. It did not work that way. And then thinking about the desk, where was I in that situation? What did I do? Did I do something to him? Did I do something for him? I think you could argue both there, right? It certainly would have not gone over well with me had someone come in and done that to me. But at the same time, it needed to be done, right? But still, we're back to who's growing there. If I do something to somebody or if I do something for somebody, who's really growing there? I mean, I'm getting what I need, but we're not really growing. And then I even did a professional development. And I will be the first to confess, this is not my favorite thing to do. I get nervous. And I've learned some tricks on how to do it, but you know, to make myself a little more comfortable, but this is not my favorite thing to do. And I thought, you know, I'm going all out for this teacher. I'm doing a big professional development. Like, I'm getting up and I'm talking in front of everybody I know, and they're all gonna look at me. And so again, I have my visual up there. And, you know, I gave advice. If it's not implemented and you find something that works for that kid, go ahead and implement it. You don't have to wait on me. Go ahead and do that. And then tell me what you find. I gave examples. You know, this child needs wait time for responses. You know, of course, we would give the wait time. And then if something is not needed, go ahead and tell me that, right? So education, okay? I kind of thought at that point I was doing something with them. I kind of felt like I did. But at the same time, was I doing it for them or with them? Because people weren't talking back to me. But they were educated then, right? Still got nothing. I even took literal examples. This was a real and true test that was given in that classroom. And I went through and I said, highlight the important words. That's all you have to do to accommodate for this kid, right? And I thought, okay, they've got real live examples. Now I'll get it, right? Again, I got nothing. Also, I gave examples of modifications. Again, this is a real live test. And I said, instead of asking it this way, you could ask it this way, okay? Again, I feel like you could go either way with I did something to him or I did something for them, right? But it really wasn't that back and forth. But doggone, I was not going to do nothing, right? And so my next step beyond that was I went to his academic coach. And I said, listen, I need help. I need these accommodations and modifications implemented. I don't know what else to do. And so, you know, she's like, okay, we'll talk about it during PLC. I was like, okay, thanks. When that didn't work, then I did the ultimate step, and I went to administration. And I said, I know that I went in like a bull in a china shop on this teacher, but I really need this done, and I don't know what else to do. And again, she reiterated, it's organization. It's that simple, okay? And then I had a moment where it was like, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, where one of the quotes that I was just like casually hearing on the TV was, what are you doing for others? And I thought, well, what am I doing for him? And for some reason, I just had that conviction. What you're really doing is you're creating a toxic relationship. And that's not what I need to be doing, right? I don't need to be the authoritarian going into somebody else's classroom, not even my classroom, and saying, this is what you have to do, right? It's not beneficial to that relationship. And we all know that teaching, I mean, that is teaching 101, right? That's what we build our whole premise on. We develop relationships with each other. We develop relationships with the kids. And if you don't have it, they don't care what you know, right? And so then I got to thinking, how is it that I would organize this information if I were back in the general education room? Because I've done both, and I remember what it was like. And so I went through and I organized all of those IEPs in one document for him. I took out all the unnecessary words, and so then at that point, all he had was one checklist during class. This is what you need to do. When you give a test, this is what you need to do for these kids. This is what you need to do every Friday. It's really that simple. When I went to this phase, and I actually sat down with him and said, I know it's overwhelming. Let me extend a token to you, a gift to you, and see if we can't work together to hammer through these. And let's talk about each one. What area do you still need help with? And that was the changing point in, first of all, our relationship, and second of all, the things that I got from him at that point, because that is when he started accommodating and modifying for my kids. Change is often needed. And, there's my quote. I forgot to put it in there. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And then I had the planning session with the MTSU, and I'm so proud that this person that has greatly influenced me in my career is here today. She's going to kill me for calling her out. But this was I asked her to just share her story. Just simple as that, share her story.
So I started out one year with a new teacher. She had just moved here for middle school, and she really struggled to understand my kids. And she even made the comment to me one day that just maybe my kids need to try a little bit harder. And of course, at first I was very offended. I wanted to advocate for my kids and tell her all the things she didn't know. But I realized that would not get me anywhere. So this was a teacher that I started pushing into the classroom more frequently. And I've seen, we've worked together now for 4 years, and she has come such a long way from giving me tests or assignments, asking me to totally accommodate them or modify them, to now just occasionally checking when she runs into some difficulty. I've just seen so much growth in her understanding, and again, at that same time, me understanding what she has to do in the classroom. But I think that big thing is just that respect and that relationship, and just understanding what her role is and my role. And it's taken me 25 years to figure that out. So definitely I've had some changes in just how I view general education teachers, and a lot of that changed when I started going into the classroom and trying to support our special education kids. And I think there's just really been a misunderstanding between general education teachers and special education teachers, just what we do. I would give them their IP to glance and accommodations, and I'm like, just do it, read it to them, I didn't think what they were having to do until I started pushing in and seeing the rigor of the standards, seeing how much that they had going on in the classroom and how much more difficult that was to achieve. So that was a big turning point for me as far as just trying to assist them, giving them ideas and suggestions, and just teaching them about our kids. I had so many teachers who just felt like our kids didn't try hard enough. That's why they were in special ed. So there's just been really, in my viewpoint, in my 24 years of experience, gen ed and special ed, we just didn't understand each other. I didn't understand the standards. They didn't understand learning disabilities or autism. And so working together and actually being in that environment and seeing all the things that gen ed teacher had on their plate really gave me utmost respect for them, first of all. And second, it really changed how I worked on those relationships. And just by assisting them and giving them ideas and suggestions, and then the next year, I didn't have to do that because there was growth within that relationship. So I think just walking a day into their shoes, and helping them understand what our job looks like. We're not just in the classroom playing games and having a good time or remediating, trying to do homework, that we're there trying to push those kids up from where they are. But I realized that I actually have the easy job because, we're addressing kids where they're at. And so we see them at their best, where the gen ed teacher is trying to pull them years and years up to, reach those standards, and at the same time trying to deal with her high kids and her middle kids and all the things. So definitely just that partnership just changed for me when my respect for what they did just grew.
In order for it to be successful, I think it has to start at the very beginning of each school year with communication with the teachers. Very first thing. Throughout the school year, it gets a little more challenging because of the tie once everybody gets into instruction. But as long as that relationship and communication takes place at the beginning of the year, I think it sets the foundation for it for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And establishing that trust is really important. When she said, like, if they trust you, then they're going to do what they need to do for not only for the kids' purposes, but because they trust you and they know that you're not going to steer their own. I think it's also really important to explain the why behind why we're doing some things, because a lot of times accommodations may or may not make sense in the IEP to the teacher, and it's kind of like, well, he doesn't really need 2 extra days to finish this assignment. But when you explain the why behind it, the organizational issues that he or she may have, or the different things that he or she may struggle with their other health impairment, then they're like, okay. And I have found that once you explain, hey, look, if he doesn't need it and take advantage of it, fabulous. But what we're not going to have is him taking advantage of this. And then they're like, okay, cool. Well, then I can do that. So working with them so that they know, again, establish that trust, but working with so that you're empowering them and building capacity. Because when you work with somebody instead of doing it for them, they usually learn more. And then that way, the next year when they have another student with an IEP, well, we've already got the relationship, as we're going to say, number one. And number two, I'm not going to need to spend as much time with that teacher because we have built that capacity with them for them to be able to do that for themselves and just kind of take it. And there's nothing more beautiful than that, is when they're like, oh, hey, look what I did. Look what I did for so-and-so. Look what I came up with. It's great. It's really a really good feeling.
Yeah.
So
just today, a teacher wanted me to come to the room, and they're like, look, I want to show you how I was able to get them to do this assessment. Maybe you could have them add this to their IEP so next year the teacher can use these visuals for them.
yeah,
So it was just to see the excitement on her face that she was able to meet the students' need, and she knew that to share that with me so I could share that with her future teachers.
yeah. Then you're so good at reinforcing stuff. I'm sure that you were like, yes. A specific teacher loves reinforcement. So if she thinks she's done a good job, she is going to continue to do it. That's awesome. But again, just not doing it for, doing it with. Let's do it with. Let's be collaborative. We are a team here. And then always show your support. Be very supportive, because they're going to trust you. But you don't ever want to do it to them. You don't ever want to come in their room and say, okay, this kid has an independent workstation in his IEP. I'm going to take this desk and just put it over here, because as teachers, we're real type A, like that's kind of our house, You don't just come in and do it to them because that feels really punitive. So again, it goes back to trust and communication.
Building a relationship.
And building a relationship.
And so those are the people that influenced me from my side. And so when I was preparing for this day, I also knew that I needed to get the general education perspective. And I do have another video because I wanted this to really, if we're going to talk about collaboration, I wanted it to be really and truly collaborative, right? And so you will see, I think, 5 different schools represented in this whole presentation. So if you want to.
So talking about the general education perspective, a lot of things with the specific example that Dr. Chu gave really resonated with me as a teacher, and not from a standpoint of I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm going to say, no, I'm not doing these things for these students that you've recommended, but coming from a place of I'm already drowning in the demands of teaching, and now you're adding things on top of what I need to do. And for some teachers, not even knowing what that looks like. So that was kind of an aha moment that we had, just seeing the difference in perspective, because when I hear those stories, I'm thinking like, man, how overwhelmed it would be to not even understand an IEP at a glance. And I remember reading them for the first time years ago when I started teaching and thinking like, I have no idea what this says and what this means and how does this look in a classroom, because, and we'll talk about that, you're not super prepared for those things when you come into teaching. I'm really prepared for general education. I'm not really prepared for special education in that world.
And then we can video kids and ask them, how does push-in help them? Put the children talking on the video, but you could still have teacher input by us writing our answer on that post-it.
Honestly, what you just said, ask the kids.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're the one perspective that we're not asking for.
Guarantee you ask them, do you prefer to stay in class or pull out? I think both would go back and forth. Some may love to leave. I think some could really answer how it helps. I just stay in. I prefer to stay in the room. Yeah.
Why do they prefer to stay in the room?
I think it makes them feel more like a typical student instead of one that needs extra help.
The differences aren't so different anymore.
Yes, that's a better way to put it.
You know, right?
And all the students are benefiting from you helping and walking around the room.
It's always nice to have a second pair of eyes.
100% ears.
Yeah. They are, but I feel like I can learn a lot from the push-in because I can see how you handle when they get stuck, you know, and I can learn from you by observing you handling those kids. And then they feel successful because they didn't have to pull out, you know, to stay inside the lesson. And then I think that the resource teachers can benefit from seeing grade level, like what, because sometimes you lose touch with what the on-level kids are doing and the expectations for those kids during testing. And like, I think the connections there, even for the adults, are really strong when you push in.
It helps them develop stronger skills of math and reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they have.
And then that way, when you're not there, then I'm about, okay, I remember what she did to help this kid. I'm going to try, you know, that we get strategies too with those babies.
The perspective of this is how you're teaching it to reinforce that at a later time. So I do like that thought.
I think the kids also see how to help their friends and that their friends can be successful. I think it kind of eliminates the labels parents are so worried about.
I struggle most with finding read aloud time for my kids because the kids that are on grade level, they don't need to hear me read it aloud. But inevitably, if I've got them at the back table reading to them, the rest of the class is listening. And so they're not getting that independent read time. That's probably what frustrates me the most, is not having a dedicated person to help them. And we've thought about, and I don't know if this is allowed, pre-recording lessons so that they could just listen to the video. I don't know if that's allowable. I've been told 2 different things on that. Because they could, if they needed to hear it again, they could just rewind it. And then that way the on-level kids are not hearing that. But yeah, there's concerns both ways with read aloud. The upper grades, they can be lengthy. And we wanted to record them beforehand and have it available to the kids. And they just went to our Google Classroom and clicked on the recording and followed along on their test, and they could wear headphones and it was silent. And then I could better monitor the class because when I'm back there reading, you got behavior, so it's not a clear read because you're constantly going back and forth. So I feel like if that could be a constant for read aloud for even the EL babes, the ML students, yes, because a lot of them get read aloud too.
I think that's the part where collaborating with your Tier 4 teachers and your
gen ed teachers really plays a part, because when you can collaborate that, I think teachers feel more comfortable with accommodations. They're easier per se to apply those, but then modifying, it's a whole nother ballgame with planning and everything. So when they can collaborate to do the modification part, that would be easier on the gen ed teacher.
I agree.
And then when they're in there in the classroom at the same time, as she had said before, you're jumping back and forth with each other, learning from each other for that part.
I think also the difficulty for me is understanding how to appropriately grade that and enter it into the grade book with their peers. I know there's indicators where it says modify and you can write, but a report card's a report card. It's numbers and it doesn't reflect where they are, because if you look at the report card, it looks like they're doing fourth grade work.
Yeah.
And like you said, they might be doing first grade work. It's hard for me when I'll have 4 or 5 with it's EL or ML students and then some resource students and some CDC students, juggling all that and not understanding the appropriate work to give them. I agree that collaborating with your team or the tier 4 is the best, but that collaboration isn't always there, honestly. So I would love to have a resource where I could know this is appropriate. So I'm like, okay, if they can do this, but is this what I'm supposed to be doing? It's very hard for us.
I also think you have to think of, in your IMPs with the parents, are they clear at the exact level where their child is? Because I know sometimes, you start on positive and you say, Sally is doing a great job in math class, but she may be doing a great job on second grade math in my 6th grade classroom. And so I think sometimes we have to make sure to clarify that, maybe show examples to the parents. This is an ed tier 1, 6th grade problem, but Sally is working on this fraction problem, which is 2nd grade, or making sure they're really clear so that when they do see that report card, they still understand it's been modified. They're still working on that same skill or standard, but it's not necessarily standard, but it's been modified. I agree with that, Sean.
Yes. Okay. So typically I will just have that conversation for you so that you don't have to do that, because that's a hard conversation, right?
Right.
So if you don't have me, then what?
Yeah. So if that hasn't been done, and I have a student in my 6th grade classroom, and that hasn't been done, hasn't been followed and explained to parents well, and if I do that, or someone, in the IEP does it that year, that can be an even harder conversation because the parents haven't been explained clearly before. So I just think that's a critical part in showing those examples, or showing, if it's reading, showing a book that's on a level 2nd grade and showing a book on a 6th grade level to truly explain the differences to parents. Because when it hasn't been done before, and say they get their grades from 5th grade, well, my child was making all A's on everything, and then they come to me and I'm like, well, they can't do this work, they can, but with scaffolding, or modifications. So trying to just show that difference, I think it's really difficult if it hasn't been followed by a manager and done that way. So that's super important.
So just to kind of go off that, we sat down and first started talking about what are some of the things from the general education perspective that we need to be successful with our special education students. And we need to be able to meet the student needs. We need to know what those needs are. Time, I feel like that's something that we can say in any realm of education, that if we just had more time, we might be able to do everything that we need to do. But not just the time to work with students. I think the teacher in the video brought up a great example of having the time to do the read aloud, having time to provide those accommodations, but planning for the modification. When we were talking, I said accommodations are some of those things I can kind of do. Once I have a toolbox of what works, then I can kind of pull those out as needed in the classroom, but a modification I cannot do on the spot. So needing the time to plan for those, to make the modifications, and also meeting with the SPED teacher that you're working with is huge. Being able to collaborate on what that looks like. And I love how it's been brought up multiple times that once you've built that relationship and you kind of know how to modify, then you're able to keep doing that without I don't need her to do every test that I am going to give because I now know what that looks like. More education, as I mentioned before, and then advocating for students. I've said this so many times, SPED teachers are the most passionate for their students, and it is amazing to see. And I always want to say to general education, it's not Dr. Chu's students in my room. They are my students too, that just happen to have an extra person, an extra coach on their team, but we're still all working for success, but it's still my child in my room. So when we talked about the planning ahead, some of the biggest things that I was thinking would be super helpful, and again, this takes that time to plan ahead. When are we going to get this done, and what does that look like? But I know for us, it was huge in being and helping me feel successful in the general education setting. Making tests during PLC, and going ahead when you're making those tests, talk about the modifications that you're going to give or that you could give for different students. For ELA specifically, I know in my school and in my district, our tests are made for us, which makes it a lot easier to go ahead and take that time to modify and to figure out what we could do to the test or the assignments. Communicate tasks with SPED. My very first year teaching, I was the SPED liaison, so it was my job to make sure that they knew what we were doing. So I went on to the website, I downloaded the scope and sequence, and I emailed it to the SPED teacher. And I can just imagine the eye rolling that took place when they opened the email, like, okay, I have access to this already. So you're sending me this 36-page document of what you're going to be teaching this year, and I need to do that for every grade level. And I just had no idea when they said, communicate with the SPED team what you're doing. I didn't know what that looked like. And now I have a better idea of, let me take the end goal. We talk a lot in general education about planning with the end goal in mind, and it's the same way for when you're working with different departments in your school, and especially with SPED, thinking of what's my end goal, what task do I need all of my students to complete, and just pulling those tasks and sending those and letting that be what we take time to modify, and then build those scaffolds in for what we're going to do throughout the module, throughout the 9 weeks to get us to that end goal for all students. Share what will be graded. I feel like that's something we always talk about is what do we grade and what does that look like for SPED students, because they are working at a different level. And again, it really just comes back to communicating. These are the things I'm grading for my students. So how do I make that accessible to my SPED students, and what do I need to provide, and then how do I communicate that? And I've said that multiple times to Dr. Chu, okay, what do I tell the parent when they ask this? And just allowing us to go back and forth with what do I need to tell them? And then observing a team member who scaffolds well. I feel like when we talk about planning ahead, those are the things that are going to get you the biggest bang for your buck, is being able to get those things done ahead of time. Which goes into the professional development. Dr. Chu did a professional development at the school that I teach, and I remember when we were talking about accommodations and modifications, to me that was like interchangeable. That was one word, and I just used it back and forth like it was the same thing. I had no idea it was difference. I just knew it was kind of one of those buzzwords like differentiation. I knew if I kind of threw that in there, I might sound like I know what I'm talking about. And it wasn't until that she demonstrated and truly demonstrated what that looked like. What is an accommodation versus what is a modification, that I realized the difference. And then by using those words the right way, the parents are going to understand. I'll be the first to say in IEP, I'm not using either one of those words. That's her job. Because I'm not going to get myself into a situation where I've said that I modified something that shouldn't have been modified, or I'm providing accommodations that really was a modification and I just used the wrong word. So I tell my team, as a team lead, I tell them in an IEP, because again, that's not something they teach you before you get into teaching, is when to speak, how to speak, and what to say in an IEP. And the biggest thing I say is silence is okay. Like, you can be on there, let the SPED teacher do their thing, and just be there. Because that's one thing that can get you into trouble, and it's confusing as a parent to hear all these different things. And then when what Dr. Chu's saying might be different from what I said because I said the wrong word, then it's confusing. So that's one thing I always tell my team when they say, you know, they've got their first IEP, or the teachers that I mentor, they've got their first IEP, just be silent. Because using the wrong terms can be really confusing. And I think so many general education teachers don't know the difference between an accommodation and a modification and what that looks like. Would you agree with IEPs?
I would definitely agree.
So grading, I kind of hit on that. Really, again, when you collaborate and work together, you can figure it out. So I pull the tasks out of what I'm going to do and just tell her, hey, this is the end goal. And you'll see an example with a student. And when I tell you that I had pulled out that task, and I think my exact words were, there's no way. There's no way that it's going to be able to get him there. And then I realized, okay, we've got to work together, and we collaborated. So yeah, collaboration is huge. Do you want to go on from there with the example?
Oh, yeah, we can just bounce back
Okay.
and forth on this one. This was the real example of what she and I worked together. And boy, did we ever dig deep and partner with this child. This child was not only special education, he was also, and his diagnosis was autism. He also was an EL student. So we had both of those situations going at one time. And so digging deep into which of the problems are EL issues and which ones are autism issues. And it's all language, right? And so we really and truly, she sent me this and she's like, I don't know what to do.
Help exclamation point was exactly how I felt. And I sent that down in an envelope with a kid. It was sealed up, and I said, can you go take this to Dr. Chu's room? Because I was like, I don't know what to do at this point.
And so what I did was I said, okay, what if you ask it this way? And we literally bounced that one test back and forth, what, about 2 or 3 times?
Yeah.
Before we got an answer, before we got correct answers. And figured out that this student can, in fact, answer the questions correctly, right? Even though he was at times speaking in a different language just to confuse us because he didn't know how to answer the question the way it was asked. When we started asking the right questions the way he understood, then we got the correct answers. This is the end result. Ms. Draper talked a lot about the end goal, right? This was what we wanted to get to. And by the end of the year, she did this whole thing by herself. I did nothing on it. She just sent it to me as a, hey, ta-da, look what he did. And boy, let me tell you, that was a good feeling, was it not?
Yeah, it was powerful. This student ended up getting up in front of the class and giving a presentation at the end of this module, and I was blown away. It really came going back and forth to get them there. So those scaffolds were in place, and it was constantly changing and evolving based on what he needed. And I think realizing that I needed her to help me figure out how to get him access to this. And as soon as we worked together to get him access, he did this, which is huge, what he was doing in the beginning, and then presented it in front of a class of 25 students. So yeah, it was beautiful.
So we went from, here's your test, and he's circling answers as fast as he can and turning it in, to actually taking a test and demonstrating what he understands. And so the end result can be, for us, better IEPs, right? Better student results, better, more professionalism, personal growth, and true relationships. I'm actually going to a different school next year, but I promise you I know I can call her and she can call me and say, hey, what should I do about this? Would you agree?
I would agree.
I
I'll
hope.
still send help on sticky notes when needed.
But this is, I guess, the point where I want to end. We talk a lot about relationships, right? And we know the question I would like for you guys to ponder when you leave here and take away from this is, where does it start? Okay? This is where it can end if you let it, and that's all our goal, right? This wasn't at school. This was outside of school because she needed to go somewhere and she needed me to go with her. Okay? I've got her back, but I also know she's got my back, right? And so it can't start with, hey, here's some information. It has to start with, hey, I noticed that Macy just had swimming lessons. She looked so proud of herself, right? Macy is her daughter. We start there. It doesn't start with, I didn't get 5 different schools to participate in this. I didn't start with, hi, my name's Dr. Chu, have a seat, let's do a video. It started with, hey, I'm gonna be coming to your school next year. How about we get to know each other? Your husband's having surgery, how do you think he's gonna do? Can I help you with something? That's where it starts, and that's where it can end, if you let it. Dr. Clark?
Oh, well, that's some great stuff in there, thank you. But this is Q&A time, so this is the time. Questions, comments, and please wait for the mic to come to you.
This is for Taylor. I know when you were doing your presentation, you were using the word modify or modification a lot. And I'm going, is she really modifying or is she accommodating? So to me, it was very unclear what you were doing there. And modifying changes it dramatically, where accommodating just is within the grade level. So can you address when you were talking about that?
Yeah, so when I was talking specifically about accommodations that I'll provide on the spot, those are the things that I'm not changing the end goal. I want them to complete exactly what it is that everybody else is going to complete, but I'm going to provide those scaffolds to get them there. Modifying the end goal is going to be different. It's going to be, for example, the BME chart that you saw for the student. I didn't have other students doing that, but for him, that assignment was modified so that he could provide that information in a way that he could write it out on paper to produce what my goal was for him.
So it didn't, as far as grade level, it didn't change anything, lower the grade level or anything like that as far as the student goes. It was a different way of accommodating the student based on that graphic organizer.
Well, actually, she was changing the expectation at that point. So that was a 4th grade level test. It's not even the same test. Like, she had to create a whole different test for this student. So she's changing the expectation at that point. Okay. So that would be a modification.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Okay, yes. First, I want to say thank you. It was so awesome to hear you guys, just the story of how it happened. One, I guess, an observation and a question that I had. I'm a school psychologist, so I work with lots of different grade levels. Some teachers are more willing to work with special ed teachers and others aren't. And one thing I'm wondering, because we want there to be this wonderful collaboration. As these relationships form, is it contagious? So, does it spread to other teachers that might not be as willing to work with special ed teachers, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean, especially when it comes to getting that. So getting buy-in from all teachers. And I think it is. I think that within every team, you find that teacher that you're able to get in with. And immediately, again, going back to the questions, and when she came to me and we started to build that relationship, it was really on a personal level of getting to know me. And I got to know her before we could move into a professional discussion. But I think because my team can see how much better it is for my SPED kids, they are more willing to work with our SPED department too and not really kind of push back, but it is contagious. They can see, hey, it's a lot easier if we're going to collaborate, and all it takes is really having those few teachers that you have a relationship with and have them go out and share and explain how it is easier that way.
That was a great point.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you for what you said.
Would you have suggestions for administrators? Because I know so often teachers get moved from grade to grade, or, we get moved around so long. So establishing these relationships can be difficult. Do you have maybe, some recommendations to our administration to how to make that happen?
Can I have some wait time? I'm going to advocate for myself. In order to answer that question, I just need to think out loud. I would have to put myself into an administrator's shoes. What would I do as an administrator? One thing that I could tell you is, I think probably the one thing that we have focused on is time. You know, in the day, a lot of times our collaboration was, okay, let's sit down at a table, we got 15 minutes, we can do this. Hey, I'll come to your PLC, we'll talk real live in person. Sometimes our collaboration was, I'm on my way out the door with a behavior kid behind me, and I'm going, how did that work? She's going, yep, it was great. She's still standing there holding the door, and we walk on, and that's the end of our collaboration, right? So having that specific time, like general education teachers have their planning all at the same time. We can't have planning at the same time that Gen Ed does for every grade, because we would do nothing but planning all day. That'd be great, though. We would do nothing but plan all day long. But just providing that time, like saying, okay, we're going to skip this little thing that we're doing over here, and we're going to give you 15 minutes right here to get with your Gen Ed teachers. That would be, I think, my biggest thing.
Yeah,
because we can educate all day long, but until we establish that relationship and sit down with each other, and that is probably the hardest thing, I think, in collaborating with Gen Ed.
Yeah.
Do you have additional thoughts?
No, yeah, I agree.
And may I add a comment to that as a former administrator? To let administrators know of the successes. Yes. To tell the success stories so that administrators begin to hear this is working, or this is working, or we had this difficult situation, but we found the solution and this worked. Can win the administrator's understanding and change the attitude, and administrators' attitudes can set the culture of the school.
Totally agree. And I will say, I was so pleased to be able to, after I had to duck my tail and go in and tell my administrator what I had done, I was so excited to go back and say, you know what, I finally listened to you, and I really took to heart what you said, and this is what I'm getting now. And so to be able to, well, first of all, admit that she was right, that was hard, but but to be able to go back and say, you know what, that was kind of on me, right? But, you know, and share that success with her. And to be able to end my year with a positive relationship with this teacher was awesome for me.
Dr. Chu, Ms. Draper, this was a great presentation. Loved the stories and the words from the teachers. And this continued the theme of this morning from the first session of collaborating with Gen Ed teachers. So many thanks for being here.
Absolutely.